Religion has always been the easiest thing for an empire to ban. Build the wrong shrine, light the wrong candle, mumble the wrong syllables in the wrong language, and somebody with a sword will eventually decide your soul needs saving the hard way. The history of suppressed faiths is really just the history of power. The punchlines are darker than they should be, the body counts are bigger than they should be, and the surviving evidence is whatever the conquerors didn't bother to set on fire. So today, 10 religions that empires tried to erase. Some of them you have never heard of. That is exactly the point. The Roman Senate's first religious panic. In 186 BC, the Roman Senate looked at a wine cult and decided that Western civilization itself was on the verge of collapse. The cult was the Bacchanalia, devoted to Bacchus, the Roman version of Dionysus, the Greek god of wine, theater, and being absolutely unhinged in the woods at night. The cult had drifted into Italy from the Greek south, and by the early 2nd century BC, it had become wildly popular, especially among women, freedmen, slaves, and the urban poor. In other words, all the people the Senate hated dealing with. According to Livy, who clearly enjoyed every minute of writing this, the whole thing got busted because of a love triangle. A young Roman named Publius Aebutius was about to be initiated by his stepfather, and his lover Hispala Faecinia, a freed prostitute who had been dragged into the cult as a slave girl, panicked and warned him. Aebutius told his aunt. The aunt told the consul. The consul told the Senate. The Senate then absolutely lost its mind. Livy claims more than 7,000 people were involved in the cult, that wills were being forged, citizens poisoned, and unspeakable rituals performed in caves with drums beating to drown out the screams. Modern historians think most of that is moralistic embellishment by a guy who wanted to make ancient Rome sound cooler than it was. But the response was real. The Senate issued the Senatus Consultum de Bacchanalibus, mass arrests, public executions, women handed back to their families to be killed in private rather than embarrass the Republic in court. Livy notes, almost casually, that the executions outnumbered the imprisonments. The actual bronze tablet of the decree still exists, dug up in 1640 in southern Italy, currently sitting in a museum in Vienna, 2,200 years old, and the engraving basically reads, "No more parties. Caesar versus the Wicker Men." If you want to know where every fantasy novel got its idea of the spooky druid in the forest, blame Julius Caesar. In Book 6 of his Gallic War, Caesar describes the Druids as the priestly intellectual elite of Celtic Gaul, who memorized 20 years of oral law and burned prisoners alive, inside giant wicker statues shaped like men. Pliny the Elder added that they harvested mistletoe with golden sickles by moonlight. Tacitus called them sorcerers. The Romans could not get enough. There was a problem though. The Druids were not just priests, they were judges, doctors, ambassadors, and crucially, the people who organized cross-tribal resistance against Rome. So when Caesar conquered Gaul in the 50s BC, the Druids became a political target. Augustus banned Roman citizens from practicing Druidism. Tiberius cracked down further, and in around 54 AD, the Emperor Claudius abolished Druidism completely. Suetonius records the law in one curt little phrase that translates to, "He stamped out the religion of the Druids utterly." The most famous moment came in 60 AD on the island of Anglesey, off the coast of Wales. The Roman governor, Suetonius Paulinus, marched his legions across the Menai Strait in flat-bottomed boats. On the far shore, according to Tacitus, were ranks of Druids with their hands raised, cursing the sky, and women in black robes running between them, brandishing torches and screaming curses. The legionaries froze. They actually froze. Then their officers shoved them forward, and the Romans massacred everyone on the beach, cut down the sacred groves, and smashed the altars where, allegedly, prisoners had been burned alive in human sacrifice. Was the human sacrifice real? Probably, yes, sometimes. Lindoman, a perfectly preserved Iron Age body found in a Cheshire bog in 1984, has the so-called triple death wound: blow to the head, garrote around the neck, throat cut, plus mistletoe pollen still in his stomach. So the lurid Roman accounts had at least a kernel of truth. But Roman writers also used the sacrifice angle the way later empires used "they eat babies" as a moral excuse for taking your land. By around 80 AD, the Druids of Britain were essentially gone. We do not have a single line of their oral tradition. The Wicker Man got a movie. The actual religion got nothing. Mani, the painter-prophet who got crucified twice. In the year 216 AD, in what is now southern Iraq, a child was born named Mani. By the time he was 24, he was claiming visions, and within a few decades, his religion stretched from Roman North Africa all the way to the coast of China. Manichaeism, the faith you have probably never heard of, even though for almost 1,000 years it was a top 3 world religion. Mani's pitch was elegant. The universe is split between light and darkness. The two were forever at war, and human souls were tiny shards of trapped light trying to fight their way home. He cherry-picked from Zoroastrianism, Christianity, Buddhism, and Gnosticism. He even illustrated his own scriptures so beautifully that Mani became a Persian word meaning great painter. The Sasanian king Shapur I let him preach, let him travel with the army, and let him publish. Then Shapur died. The new king, Bahram I, listened to a furious Zoroastrian high priest named Kartir, who hated Mani for diluting the official fire religion. Mani was arrested, chained, and died in prison around 274 AD. His followers called it the crucifixion, deliberately echoing Christ. Bahram had Mani's body decapitated, the skin stuffed with straw, and hung over a city gate as a warning. Subtle. Rome was not friendlier. In about 302 AD, the Emperor Diocletian issued a special edict targeting Manichaeans by name. He said they were a foreign Persian poison, and he ordered the leaders burned alive together with their books. After Christianity took over, the persecution got worse. Theodosius made it a capital offense. Justinian made it a capital offense again, just to be sure. In China, Manichaeism spread along the Silk Road and even became, briefly, the state religion of the Uyghur Empire. After the Uyghurs collapsed, the Tang Emperor Wuzong launched a purge in 843. Manichaean priests were ordered killed. 70 nuns in the capital reportedly were ordered to die rather than be defrocked. Their temples were torn down or quietly relabeled as Buddhist. And the kicker, St. Augustine of Hippo, the most influential Christian theologian in Western history, was a Manichaean for 9 years before he converted. The man who basically invented the doctrine of original sin used to belong to a banned faith that taught the body was a prison made by the devil. So next time someone tells you Christianity invented Western thought, remind them that the guy who designed it was a defector from a religion that everybody, eventually, killed. When Christians were the cult everyone wanted to murder, before Christianity was the religion, it was the religion empires tried to erase. The largest persecution came under the Emperor Diocletian and ran from 303 to about 311 AD. Historians call it, with admirable understatement, the Great Persecution. The first edict was issued on the 23rd of February, 303, on the Roman feast of Terminalia, which celebrates the god of boundaries and endings. That choice was deliberately symbolic. Christianity was supposed to end. Churches were ordered demolished. Scriptures had to be surrendered. Christians were stripped of legal rank and citizenship rights. The second edict that summer ordered all clergy arrested. The third offered freedom if they sacrificed to Roman god. The fourth, in 304, demanded universal sacrifice from every single inhabitant of the empire. That last one is when the killing actually started. Bishops who handed over their scriptures got nicknamed traditores, handovers, and that single word became the root of traitor. The schism it caused in North Africa, the Donatist controversy, kept Christians fighting each other for the next 3 centuries. Now the casualty count. Christian tradition will tell you millions of martyrs. Modern scholarship, including the historian Candida Moss in her 2013 book on the subject, puts the verifiable number at somewhere around 3,000 to 3,500 deaths. Bad. Not millions. The persecution was also wildly uneven. In Gaul and Britain, where the future Emperor Constantine's father was running things, only the first edict was really enforced, and almost nobody died. In Egypt and Palestine, where Eusebius personally watched executions happen, the carnage was constant. Here is the actual punchline though. Diocletian, the man who tried to wipe Christianity off the map, voluntarily abdicated the throne in 305 AD. He was the only Roman emperor in 500 years to retire. He moved to Croatia and grew cabbages for the rest of his life. 8 years later, his successors Constantine and Licinius signed the Edict of Milan in 313, granting Christians full legal toleration. Within 70 years, the religion he tried to erase was the official religion of the empire that tried to erase it. He never got to see it. He was probably already dead, in his garden, surrounded by the vegetables he loved more than power. How Bulgaria gave English the word bugger. In the 10th century, in what is now Bulgaria, a priest named Bogomil started preaching. His name meant, dear to God. His followers were called Bogomils, and their theology was wild even by medieval standards. Bogomils believed that God had 2 sons. The older son was Satanael, who created the visible material world, including human bodies. The younger son was Christ, who came to liberate the trapped souls inside those bodies. Therefore, the entire physical world was evil. Therefore, the Catholic Church was a fraud. The cross was an instrument of torture worthy of no veneration, the sacraments were tricks, and reproductive sex was actually a crime against the soul because it manufactured more meat prisons. Tsar Peter I, the Bulgarian ruler at the time, was horrified. He wrote letters to the Patriarch of Constantinople asking what to do. Mass burnings followed. In around 1100, the Byzantine Emperor Alexios Komnenos personally watched the Bogomil leader Basil, the physician, get burned alive in the Hippodrome of Constantinople. His own daughter Anna wrote it down in her book, The Alexiad. But Bogomilism did not die. It traveled west, through northern Italy, through southern France, and eventually it became, or strongly influenced, the Cathars. And here is where the linguistic glow-up happens. The Latin word for Bulgarian is Bulgarus. In Old French, Bugre came to mean any of these dualist heretics. The English imported the word, called every Bulgarian heretic, a bugger, and the term shows up in English court documents as early as 1330, specifically meaning abominable heresy. The sexual meaning, buggery, as we know it now, is not recorded until 1555. Why the slide from heresy to sex crime? Because medieval Catholic propagandists kept accusing dualist heretics of refusing procreative sex. If they would not make babies, the church reasoned, they must be doing something else, and that something else got the lurid label. The slur survived, the faith did not. There is something deeply tragic about a religion being so thoroughly erased that the only thing it left in the modern English language is an insult. Caedite eos. God will sort it out. The Cathars were the Bogomils' successors in southern France. They lived in a region called Languedoc, around towns like Albi, which is why historians sometimes call them Albigensians. They were, by medieval standards, weird in the best ways. They had women preachers, they were strict vegetarians, they refused to swear oaths. The elite class of Cathars, called the perfecti, lived lives so austere they made ordinary monks look fundamentally unserious. Naturally, they got popular. Pope Innocent III was not having it. In 1208, after his envoy Pierre de Castelnau got murdered in Languedoc, Innocent called for a crusade. Not against Muslims, not against the Holy Land, against fellow European Christians on European soil. The Albigensian Crusade kicked off in 1209. The first major target was the city of Béziers. The papal legate in command was a Cistercian abbot named Arnaud Amalric. When his soldiers asked him how to tell the Cathar heretics from the regular Catholic citizens hiding inside the city, he is supposed to have answered with the most chilling sentence in medieval history, Caedite eos, novit enim dominus qui suntius. Kill them all. The Lord will know his own. The exact quote comes from a German monk named Caesarius of Heisterbach, who wrote it down a decade after the event, so historians treat it with a little skepticism. But Amalric's own letter to Pope Innocent is somehow worse. He boasted that the Crusaders put to the sword almost 20,000 people, neither sex nor age nor status spared. 7,000 of them had taken refuge in the Church of Mary Magdalene. The Crusaders burned the church. The crusade dragged on for 20 years. The grand finale came at Montségur, a mountaintop fortress in the Pyrenees. After a 9-month siege ending in March of 1244, 210 unrepentant Cathars were marched down the mountain and burned alive on a single mass pyre. The site is still called the Prat dels Cremats, the Field of the Burned. To finish the job, in 1233 Pope Gregory IX founded a brand new institution to root out any remaining heretics. It was called the Inquisition. The Cathars got the bonfires. We got an institution that ran for the next 600 years. The year China killed 4 religions at once. In 845 AD, the Tang dynasty emperor Wuzong, a fanatical Taoist who was probably already going slowly insane from drinking mercury elixirs cooked by Taoist priests for immortality, decided that Buddhism had to go. The reason was partly theological, and partly the Tang treasury was on fire after the Uyghur Wars and the empire desperately needed cash. The monasteries had cash. The math wrote itself. The numbers from the Huichang persecution are staggering. 4,600 Buddhist monasteries demolished. 40,000 smaller hermitages and shrines destroyed. 260,500 monks and nuns forcibly returned to lay life and put back on the tax rolls. All temple bronze and iron melted down to mint coins. Gold and silver shipped to the imperial treasury. An entire religious infrastructure dismantled in about 18 months. And it was not just Buddhism. Wuzong's edict was a 4-for-1 combo. He also targeted Manichaeism, Zoroastrianism, and Nestorian Christianity, which the Chinese called the religion of light. After 845, all 3 of those foreign faiths essentially vanished from China for centuries. Persian fire temples that had stood in the capital Chang'an for 200 years were torn down in days. Christian crosses thrown in the river. We know what it looked like up close because of a Japanese monk named Enin, a Buddhist pilgrim who happened to be in China during the persecution and kept a diary. He watched the soldiers come for the temples. He watched abbots hide the relics. He watched fellow monks rip off their robes and pretend to be normal civilians. He barely escaped the country alive, and his diary survives today as one of the most chilling eyewitness accounts of religious destruction in any pre-modern society. The cherry on top is the timing. Wuzong died in 846, less than a year after his persecution peaked. At the age of 32, the leading scientific theory is that the cinnabar elixirs his Taoist priests fed him to grant immortality were slowly poisoning him with mercury. He was killed by the very religion he had used to murder 4 others. His successor reversed everything immediately. The big Buddhist schools never fully recovered. Chan, which we now call Zen, survived best because it had no big monasteries to demolish, just monks sitting on hillsides. Sometimes the only way to survive an empire is to have nothing worth confiscating. The bishop who burned a civilization's library. On the 12th of July, 1562, in the town of Mani in the Yucatan, a Spanish Franciscan friar named Diego de Landa stood in front of an enormous bonfire. Into that fire he threw what he himself called a great number of books. Bark paper books, folded screen books, hand-painted in red, black, and Maya blue. The Maya called them uhilkab. We call them codices. They contained the astronomical, religious, historical, and ritual knowledge of an entire civilization that had been writing things down for over 1,000 years. By his own admission, Landa burned 27 of them, plus around 5,000 religious idols. Some scholars suspect the real number was much higher. He wrote, with no apparent shame, that the Maya regretted the loss to an amazing degree, and which caused them much affliction. Today, only 4 Maya codices survive on the entire planet, named after the European cities where they ended up: the Dresden Codex, the Madrid Codex, the Paris Codex, and the Grolier Codex. 4. Out of God knows how many thousands. Landa did not stop at books. He launched an inquisition into Maya religious practice. He tortured an estimated 4,500 Maya, using ropes, hoists, and water torture. At least 158 died under torture, or shortly after. He was eventually recalled to Spain on charges of abusing his authority. He was acquitted, and then promoted to Bishop of Yucatan in 1572. The system worked exactly as designed. There is one bitter twist. Back in Spain, defending himself against the charges, Landa wrote a book called Relación de las Cosas de Yucatán. In it, trying to prove he understood Maya culture, he carefully recorded what he thought was the Maya alphabet. He was wrong. Maya writing is not alphabetic. It is mostly syllabic and logographic. But in 1952, a Russian linguist named Yuri Norizov used Landa's flawed alphabet as the key that finally cracked Maya hieroglyphs. So the man who tried to burn an entire civilization's literature accidentally left behind the only key that allowed us to read the few books he did not catch. History is a vindictive thing. It usually wins on a long enough timeline. It is just very rarely on time. When America outlawed the Sundance, in 1883, the United States Secretary of the Interior issued something called the Code of Indian Offenses. It is not famous. It should be. The code criminalized the Sundance. It criminalized the ghost dance. It criminalized the potlatch ceremonies of the Pacific Northwest. It criminalized the practice of medicine men. It criminalized polygamy and traditional burial rites. The penalty for any of it was up to 30 days in jail or denial of food rations. On a starving reservation, denial of rations was a slow death sentence. The most charged moment came with the ghost dance. In January of 1889, during a total solar eclipse, a northern Paiute man named Wovoka had a vision. He said that if native peoples danced a specific round dance for 5 days, the dead ancestors would return, the buffalo would come back, the white settlers would vanish, and the world would be made whole again. Within a year, the ghost dance had spread to dozens of tribes. The Lakota added a unique twist: ghost shirts, painted with sacred symbols, that they believed would stop bullets. The U.S. government panicked. Sitting Bull, who had nothing to do with starting the ghost dance, was killed by Indian police on the 15th of December, 1890, during an arrest at Standing Rock. 2 weeks later, on the 29th of December, 1890, the 7th Cavalry surrounded Spotted Elk's band of about 350 Lakota at Wounded Knee Creek. They opened fire. Estimates of the dead range from 250 to 300 Lakota, more than half of them women and children. 20 soldiers received the Medal of Honor for that day. The medals were only formally rescinded in 2024. 134 years later, the Sundance ban was enforced for almost 90 years. Native communities still danced, just in remote canyons, in disguised forms, at risk of arrest. The American Indian Religious Freedom Act was finally signed in 1978 by President Carter. It is, on paper, weak, basically a policy statement with no enforcement teeth, but it did one thing that mattered. For the first time in just under a century, you could legally dance the Sundance on American soil without going to jail. The last Zoroastrians were charged rent for their souls. For over 1,000 years, Zoroastrianism was the official state religion of the Persian Empire. Founded around the time of Moses, possibly earlier, it gave the world some of the oldest organized monotheistic ideas: the cosmic battle between good and evil, the concept of a final judgment, the belief in heaven and hell, even the original 3 wise men, who were Zoroastrian magi. Then in 651 AD, the last Sasanian Shah, Yazdegerd III, was assassinated in a corner of his own empire by a man who reportedly killed him for his clothes. Persia fell to the Arab-Muslim conquest, and Zoroastrianism, the religion of empire, became the religion of refugees overnight. The Arab caliphates classified Zoroastrians as dhimmi, protected non-Muslims, technically allowed to practice but required to pay the jizya, a special tax on unbelievers, in addition to land taxes. Over the next several centuries, the pressure grew. Fire temples were torn down or converted to mosques. The Great Fire Temple at Istakhr near Persepolis, which had burned continuously for centuries, became a mosque. Zoroastrian men in some towns were forbidden to ride horses, to build houses taller than Muslims, or to wear bright colors. In Yazd, they had to carry a small shawl with them to lay under their feet so that they did not pollute a Muslim's carpet. The jizya tax was collected from Iranian Zoroastrians until 1882, when a Parsi philanthropist named Menekji Limji Hataria personally lobbied the Cathar government to end it. By that point, he counted only 7,711 Zoroastrians left alive in all of Iran. Some had fled long before. According to a Parsi epic poem written in 1599 from oral tradition, a group of Zoroastrians escaped Khorasan, lived for 100 years on an island in the Persian Gulf, and eventually sailed to Gujarat, India, where the Hindu king Jadi Rana let them stay on the condition that they adopt Gujarati, that their women wear the sari, and that they never proselytize. Their descendants are the Parsis, who today number around 50,000 in Mumbai. Their most famous member was a man born Farrukh Bulsara, whose family kept the old Zoroastrian fire alive at home, and who eventually became, professionally, Freddie Mercury. Today, there are maybe 125,000 Zoroastrians on the entire planet. The religion that gave the world the idea of cosmic justice has roughly the same global membership as the population of a mid-size American suburb. Empires erase religions. Languages survive on accident. The man who burned Maya books gave us the alphabet to read them. Diocletian built a country he could not stop. The word for Bulgarian heretic became an English insult, and the actual sky god of pre-conversion, Lithuania, Perkūnas, the last pagan deity worshipped publicly in Europe before 1387, lives on now mostly as a name people give to their cats. So if your religion ever gets banned, take comfort. History is petty, and history is slow, and history occasionally lets the conquered have the last laugh. Just probably not in your lifetime.